This is not really going to be a presentation or a discussion about technology so much as it's going to be about what's happening and how technology can influence it. I sort of wanted to start off here with a few quotes. I find that it kind of helps people, again, to establish context. And this context is about the future. You know, we in technology, how many people here know Moore's Law? You know, the prices go down by half and the performance goes up by 2 every 18 months. You know, we like nice, you know, technologists like nice linear projections of the future. That's what we thrive on, it's how we do things. Well, that's really not how the world in general works. It's very, very hard to predict the future. There's a famous Niels Bohr quote that says the difficult thing about, you know, that prediction is difficult, especially about the future, which kind of sums the whole thing up. However, you can do some things, and it is not necessarily predicting what will happen, but you can probably do a good job of guessing what the environment is going to be. And that'll give you some insight about what's actually going to happen. I think one of my favorites in the whole thing is Peter Drucker, but he said a lot of interesting things, and one of my favorites is this concept of about predicting the future. You know, it's applicable not only as the quote itself about the future, but it's also about the concept of strategy and innovation. You know, you got to get your head up. You know, one of the things that I do is I teach motorcycle racing. And one of the hardest things to do when you're teaching people how, you know, to race or performance riding on motorcycles is to get their eyes up. They're always looking right there as they go into the corner. Well, that's the greatest way to crash, and you'll never get this fast. You have to always be getting your eyes up and looking. When you're going into the corner, you're already looking at the next corner. You're not looking at the corner that you're in. My favorite science fiction authors is Arthur Clarke. How many people know Clarke? Great writer. He actually has come up with a number of laws about the future and prediction and those kinds of things. And he has 3 laws in particular that are my favorite. The first one is anytime an expert tells you something is possible, they're probably right. If that same expert says something is impossible, they're probably wrong. And if you think about it, that's really the history of technology. People would say things could not be done, and generally we end up being able to do them. And that's one of the other things to think about the future. Pay more attention to what people say are possible and less attention to what people say are impossible. One of the other things, and it's a major issue, in fact, the larger the company is, the more of an issue it is, you can only discover where the limits are by going past them. And most large companies are very risk averse. So much has been established in the organization, they really don't push the limits. And if you're really going to be successful in innovation, you got to cross the limit. You got to fail, you got to crash every once in a while. Otherwise, you're just not going to know where your limits are, where the limits of your bike is, where the limits of the track that you're on is at, unless you push them just a little bit. And then my favorite one is any advanced technology basically appears to be magic. And if you think about some of the things that have happened just recently about, how many of you are walking around with Star Trek communicators on your belts? We all are, aren't we? But at the time, it seemed like magic. And I was at a conference recently, I was pointing out to people, it's not just that you have that Star Trek communicator, but on top of that, because you have that Star Trek communicator, I know where you are, who you're with. I can tell you every restaurant within walking distance and tell you what's on the menus for all of them, which is basically what the sensors used to do on the Starship Enterprise, right? Well, the technology is different than projected, but the actual outcomes are the same. I'm going to share 2 other Clarke observations with you. The book that's up there is actually a book he wrote in 1962, and it's a discussion of what he calls the hazards of prophecy. And what he talks about is most failure of prophecy comes from a lack of imagination. 2 key points. Given all relevant information, people refuse to face the implications. And we've seen that over and over in our industry. How many people remember Ashton Tate? How many people remember Digital Equipment Corporation? How many people remember Compaq? They were all people who had all of the information available to them to survive, and they chose to ignore it. The other, what I really love, is failure to acknowledge there might be discoveries that make the impossible trivial. How many people have made huge investments and then the next day somebody has invented something or innovated something that totally changed the marketplace? Classic example, how many people know who Sony Corporation is? Sony Corporation, okay, the single most amazing thing about Sony Corporation is they had all of the technology necessary to produce an iPod, but they never did. They had all of the content necessary to service the iPod, but they never did. They had all of the infrastructure, they had all of the marketing, they had the name brand, they had absolutely everything, and they didn't create the iPod, right? So the mystery is not why was Apple so successful in creating the iPod. The mystery is why Sony wasn't the one who did it. So we're going to be talking as we go through the presentation about some of these concepts and ideas to give you a flavor